couple more trig equations. This first one is dangerous. It's very easy to think divide on this problem because tangent squared and tangent are set equal to each other. Just remember that you will lose the solution if you divide both sides by a variable. And since there's an x with that tangent, it is a variable. So I'm going to subtract my tan of x over, so I have everything on the same side. And remember, those aren't like terms because they don't have the same exponent. And now you can GCF out a tangent. Just like with the last problem where you had those, or with the problem a couple problems ago where you had the signs going on. Sorry. Just like where you had the signs going on, just make sure however many terms you started with, that's the number of terms that you need in your parentheses. So since we started with 2 terms, we need 2 terms in our parentheses. And now we have tangent of x equals 0 and tangent of x minus 1 equals 0. So tangent of x equals positive 1. We're pretty good at tangent equal to 1. That's at fourths. And tangent pi over 4 is our first quadrant value. The other pi over 4 we need is 5 pi over 4 in the third quadrant. Tangent is equal to 0 is a little tricky, so I like to go ahead and rewrite tangent as sine over cosine. If you don't have tangent is equal to 0 memorized, just rewrite. In order to get 0, we need a 0 on top, which means if sine is 0, cosine is either positive 1 or negative 1. Those are the pairs that happen. So cosine, sine is 0 and cosine is positive 1 at 0 and 2 pi. And cosine is negative 1 and sine is 0 at pi. So 4 solutions for this one, 0 and pi over 4 and 5 pi over 4. Picking that on a multiple choice test is a little bit tricky just because you have to sort through all the things that aren't answers. So just make sure that you take your time picking your solutions there. All right, this number 10 looks super overwhelming until you break it up. And if you would rather write it with u's, I think that might be helpful on this one. So I'm going to write 4u cubed. I'm going to let sine of x equal u. 4u cubed plus 2u squared minus 2u minus 1. And hopefully when you do that, you can recognize that this is just a little grouping problem. Your factoring is already set up nicely for you. The order is nice. From my first 2 terms, I can GCF out a 2u squared. Ooh, that's not how I wanted that to write. I want to factor out, again, a 2u squared. And when I do that, I'm left with 2u plus 1. When you're factoring by grouping, you always bring down the middle sign, S-I-G-N. So I'm going to bring down that minus there. And 2u and 1 don't have anything else in common, so I'm going to leave that negative 1 outside and just bring down the 2u. But factoring out that negative switches this other sign. It switches both signs. Again, when you're factoring by grouping, it's good to keep in mind that your parentheses should match. So it can kind of guide you and help you with those negatives. When we're factoring out a negative here, those 2 negatives come outside. And now we can rewrite our grouping. 2u squared minus 1, 2u plus 1. And whenever you're ready to put your signs back in, it's great. I might just keep going here and leave before I put my signs back in. So this would be u squared equals, add the 1, divide by 2. And over here, u equals negative 1/2. And this is as good a time as any to put that sine and sine squared back in there. So sine squared of x, is that our variable? I think so. Yep. Equals 1/2. Sine of x equals negative 1/2. Still got to keep going here. This one's a little bit time consuming. We have to take the square root of both sides to get sine all by itself. We need that plus minus. Square root of 1 is 1. Square root of 2 in the denominator, don't let that freak you out. I know it doesn't look like anything that's on our unit circle, but if we rationalize, then it will. So when we bring that radical 2 up, our denominator becomes 2. And now we have our 2 places for solutions. So sine is negative 1/2 at 7 pi over 6 and 11 pi over 6. Quadrant 3 and quadrant 4. And for our plusing and minus radical 2 over 2, we need all the fourths.